Hello, today is the fourth lesson in our Excel VBA in a nutshell course, and we are going to discuss the Excel object model. Everybody is familiar with the word object. In the world of programming, the word object has a different meaning. You often see it used as a part of expression object-oriented programming or OOP for short. OOP is based on the idea that software deals with objects that have attributes or properties and can be manipulated. In this lesson, I will introduce you the Excel object model, which is a hierarchy of objects contained in Excel. By the time you finish this lesson, you will have a reasonably good understanding of what OOP is about and why you need to understand this object to become a VBA developer. At the end of this video, you will learn concept of objects, find out about the Excel object hierarchy, understand object collections, refer to specific objects in your VBA code, access or change an object's properties, perform actions with an object's methods. You have used Excel for quite a while, but you probably never thought of it as an object. The more you work with VBA, the more you view Excel in those terms. You will understand that Excel is an object and that it contains other objects. Those objects in turn contains still more objects. In other words, VBA programming involves working with an object hierarchy. At the top of this hierarchy is the application object, in this case Excel itself, which we consider the mother of all objects. The application object contains other objects. Following is a list of some of the more useful objects contained in the Excel application: add-in, window, workbook, worksheet function. Each object contained in the application object can contain other objects. For example, the following list of objects can be contained in a workbook object: chart, which is a chart sheet, name, VB project, window, and worksheet. In turn, each of these objects can contain still other objects. Consider a worksheet object, which is contained in a workbook object. Some of the objects can be contained in a worksheet object are comment, hyperlink, name, page setup, pivot table, and range. If you want to do something with a range on a particular worksheet, you may find it helpful to visualize that range in the following manner. Range contained in worksheet, contained in workbook, contained in Excel. When you start digging around, you will find that Excel has more objects than you may expect. The good news is that you will never have to deal with most of these objects. When you are working on a problem, you can just focus on a few relevant objects, which you can often discover by recording a macro. Now let us discuss object collections. Collections are another key concept in VBA programming. A collection is a group of objects of the same type, and to add to the confusion, a collection is itself an object. Here are a few examples of commonly used collections. Workbooks, which is a collection of all currently open workbook objects. Worksheets, a collection of all worksheet objects contained in a particular workbook object. Charts, a collection of all chart objects, chart sheets, contained in a particular workbook object. Sheets, a collection of all sheets, regardless of their type, contained in a particular workbook object. Collections are very useful when you want to do stuff with not just one worksheet, but with a couple of them or all of them. As you will see, your VBA code can loop through all members of a collection and do something to each one. Referring to objects in VBA code. Referring to an object is important because you must identify the object that you want to work with. After all, VBA cannot read your mind. You can work with the entire collections of objects all at once. More often, however, you need to work with a specific object in a collection, such as a particular worksheet in a workbook. To reference a single object from collections, you put object's name or index number in brackets after the name of the collection, like this: worksheets, sheet 1 between quotes and brackets. Notice that the sheet's name is in quotation marks. If you omit quotation marks, Excel won't be able to identify the object. Excel will assume that is a variable name. If sheet 1 is first or only worksheet in a collection, you can also use the following reference: worksheets 1. In this case, the number is not in a quotation marks. If you refer to an object by using its name, use quotation marks. If you refer to an object using its index number, use a plain number without quotation marks. What about chart sheets? A chart sheet contains a single chart. It has a sheet tab, but it is not a worksheet. The object model has a collection called charts. This collection contains all of the chart sheets object in a workbook. And just to keep things logical, there is another collection called sheets. The sheets collection contains all sheets, means worksheets and chart sheets in a workbook. The sheets collection is handy if you want to work with all sheets in a workbook and don't care if they are worksheets or chart sheets. So a single worksheet named sheet 1 is a number of two collections, the worksheet collections and sheets collection. You can refer to it in one of the following ways: worksheet 1 or sheet 1. Navigating through the hierarchy. If you want to work with the application object, it's easy. You start typing application dot. Every other object in Excel's object model is under application object. You get these objects by moving down the hierarchy and connecting each object on your way with the dot operator. To get to the workbook object named book1, start with the application object and navigate down the workbooks collection object, workbooks. So application.workbooks between brackets and double quotes, book1, and the extension of Excel, close. To navigate further to a specific worksheet, add a dot operator and access the worksheets collection object. So we will repeat application dot workbooks book one extension another dot worksheets of one. If you really want to get the value from cell A1 on the first worksheet of the workbook named book1, you need to navigate one more level to the range object. So the same way, application workbooks range of the cell reference A1 close the bracket dot value. When you refer to a range object in this way, it's called a fully qualified reference. You have told Excel exactly which range you want, on which worksheets, and in which workbook, and have left nothing to the imagination. Imagination is good to people, but not so good in computer programs. If you were required to fully qualify every object reference you make, your code would get quite long and it might be more difficult to read. Fortunately, Excel provides you with some shortcuts that can improve the readability and save you some typing. For starters, the application object is always the SU. There are only few cases when it makes sense to type it. Omitting the application object reference shortens that example, which means if you know the first worksheet is currently active worksheet, then Excel assume that reference and allow you to just type range A1 value. So instead of typing all this statement, we can only type range A1 dot value. The shortcuts described here are great, but they can also be dangerous. What if you think book1.xlsx is the active workbook? You get an error, or worse, you could get the wrong value and not even realize it's wrong. For that reason, it's often best to fully qualify object references. In the subsequent lessons, we are going to discuss more structures that helps you to fully qualify your references, but also helps you to make the code more readable and cuts down on the typing. So in a brief, to refer to a workbook, we use application.workbooks of book 1. And to refer to the worksheet, the first worksheet in workbook named book 1, we use application.workbooks book1.worksheets 1. And finally, to refer to a cell A1 in the first worksheet in workbook named book 1, we use the same previous statement followed by range A1.value. And for short, we can use only range A1.value. Diving into object properties and methods. Knowing how to refer to object is important, but you cannot do anything useful by simply referring to an object. To accomplish anything meaningful, you must do one of the two things: to read or modify an object's properties, or to specify a method of action to be used with an object. With literally thousands of properties and methods available, you can easily be confused. But I have said before, you will never need to use most of the available properties and methods. Object properties. Every object has properties. You can think of properties as attributes that describe an object. An object's properties determine how it looks, how it behaves, and even whether it is visible. Using VBA, you can do two things with an object's properties: to examine the current setting of a property or to change the property's settings. Let us take an example. A single cell range object has a property called value. The value property stores the value contained in a cell. You can write VBA code to display the value property, or you may write code to display or to set the value property to a specific value. Now we are going to create a simple macro that uses a VBA built-in message box function to bring up a message box that displays the value in a cell. For example, we are going to take cell A1, put a value, then go to Visual Basic, insert module and insert procedure. We will give it a name, show value. So let us define a variable called contents that will equal worksheet sheet1 dot range a1 dot value. So we defined a variable called the contents to get the value stored in A1, cell A1 in sheet 1. Now we are going to display this value in a message box. Contents. By running the macro, we'll get a message box with the value stored in A1, which is 10. The code in this example displays the current setting of a cell value property. What if we want to change the setting for that property? We'll create another macro to change the value in cell A1 by changing the cell's value property. Insert, procedure, change value. Worksheets of sheet 1 dot range of A1 dot value equal 1002. After Excel executes this procedure, cell A1 on sheet A1 of the active workbook contains the value 1200. Let us examine it again. We'll change the value now to 5. Okay, macro, change value 1200. One point here, if the active workbook doesn't have a sheet named sheet 1, executing that macro will display an error message. VBA just follows instructions and cannot work with a sheet that doesn't exist. Each object has its own set of properties, even some properties are common to many objects. For example, many objects have a visible property. Most objects also have a name property. Some object properties are read-only properties, which means that you can use the property's value, but you cannot change it. A collection is also an object. This means that a collection also has properties. For example, you can determine how many workbooks are open by accessing the count property of workbooks collection. From insert procedure count books. Message books workbooks.count. As you see, number 1 means there is only one workbook is open. In addition to properties, objects have methods. A method is an action you perform with an object. A method can change an object properties or make the object do something. Now we will use clear contents method on a range object to erase contents of 10 cells on the active sheet. Assume that we have some data from A1 to A10. Insert procedure, clear range. OK, range A1 to A10 dot clear contents. Run the macro, contents are cleared. I hope that you enjoyed this lesson. Next lesson will be about VBA sub and function procedures. I will explain the difference between sub procedures and function procedures and will demonstrate many ways to execute both of them.